The joke that fell silent. The Galactic Coalition had a tradition. Whenever a new species officially joined the Alliance fleet, officers gathered in the Hall of Banners for an informal reception. Diplomats exchanged stories. Soldiers traded harmless boasts. Veterans laughed about impossible missions that somehow ended in survival. It was meant to build friendships. When humanity joined, everyone expected another peaceful civilization with a handful of border conflicts and pirate skirmishes. They were wrong. Commander Ethan Cross stood quietly near one of the observation windows, staring at the stars beyond the station's transparent dome. His dark navy uniform was almost plain compared to the decorated armor worn by officers from older civilizations. No medals. No ceremonial cape. Only a small silver insignia identifying him as Earth's representative. Lieutenant Raka of the Vex Dominion noticed immediately. "That's the human," he muttered. A nearby officer chuckled. "He doesn't look dangerous." Another laughed. "Perhaps humans intimidate enemies with paperwork." The small group erupted into laughter. Cross ignored them. That only encouraged Raka. The enormous reptilian warrior walked over carrying 2 glasses of luminous blue nectar. "For you," he said. Cross accepted it politely. "Thank you. I've heard humans enjoy military stories." "We do. So tell us one." Several nearby officers gathered around. It had become entertainment now. Raka grinned. "We have a tradition." Cross raised an eyebrow. "Oh. We ask every new officer one question." "What question?" Raka lifted his drink. "Your kill count." More laughter spread through the hall. For most coalition species, military service involved disabling ships, capturing pirates, or stunning enemy soldiers. Deaths happened, but personal kill counts rarely exceeded a few dozen across an entire career. One officer proudly announced, "Mine is 23. Another smiled. 31. An elderly captain nodded proudly. 62 during the Nebula Rebellion. Several applauded respectfully. Raka folded his massive arms. "And yours, a human." The crowd waited. Cross remained silent for several long seconds. His expression changed. Not offended. Not proud. Just tired. Finally he asked quietly. "Confirmed?" The room became strangely still. Raka laughed. "Of course confirmed." Cross nodded once. Then he looked toward the stars before answering. 4,812. Nobody laughed. Someone nearly dropped a glass. A young pilot blinked twice. "Excuse me." Cross took a calm sip of his drink. 4,812 confirmed combat fatalities. Silence. Raka frowned. "You're joking." "No." "You mean your unit?" "My personal count." Another officer forced a laugh. "Perhaps humans count drones?" "No." "Training simulations?" "No." "Animals?" "No." Cross set the glass onto a nearby table. "Enemy combatants?" The laughter had vanished entirely. One captain whispered. "Impossible." Cross didn't argue. He simply nodded politely. "I understand why you think that." The gathering slowly dispersed, each officer exchanging uneasy glances. Someone quietly contacted fleet intelligence. Others searched humanity's military records. None of them found much. Almost everything before humanity joined the coalition remained classified. That only made things worse. Across the room, Admiral Saras had watched the entire exchange without speaking. She approached Cross after everyone else had left. "They shouldn't have mocked you. They didn't know." "But..." She hesitated. Was the number true? Cross looked out into the endless darkness beyond the station. "Unfortunately." There was no pride in his voice. Only regret. Ceres noticed something she hadn't before. The human commander's eyes weren't those of a conqueror. They were the eyes of someone who still remembered every face. Before she could ask another question, alarms echoed throughout the station. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. A mechanical voice filled every corridor. Emergency alert. Unknown fleet exiting hyperspace. The observation window suddenly illuminated. Hundreds. No. Thousands. Of warships emerged from shimmering blue distortions. Their black hulls blocked entire constellations. Every officer in the hall froze. Admiral Ceres recognized the insignia instantly. Her blood ran cold. The Karoks. An ancient empire. One thought extinct centuries ago. Instead, they had returned. And they had brought an invasion fleet unlike anything the coalition had ever recorded. Cross stared silently at the approaching armada. Then, almost under his breath, he whispered words that only Ceres heard. I hoped I'd never have to do this again. The invasion had begun. The war humanity buried. The emergency sirens echoed through every corridor of Coalition Station Asterion as officers sprinted toward the command center. Conversations died mid-sentence, replaced by urgent orders and flashing tactical displays. The welcoming celebration had vanished in an instant. Commander Ethan Cross walked instead of ran. Not because he was unconcerned. Because he had heard alarms like this too many times before. Inside the command chamber, the three-dimensional star map shimmered above the central table. Thousands of red markers spread across the outer sectors like a crimson tide. An intelligence officer swallowed hard. Initial count, approximately 3,000 capital ships. Another voice interrupted. Correction. More are still emerging. The number climbed every few seconds. 3,200. 3,500. 3,800. The room grew deathly quiet. Admiral Ceres folded her hands behind her back. Can anyone identify the fleet composition? A sensor specialist enlarged one of the enemy vessels. The ship was unlike modern coalition designs. It was enormous, covered in thick black armor with crimson energy veins pulsing beneath its surface. Every vessel looked less like a spacecraft and more like a weapon carved from a mountain. They are definitely Karoks, the specialist confirmed. Ancient design signatures match the historical archives. A nervous officer frowned. But the Karoks empire disappeared nearly 4 centuries ago. They were believed extinct. They were believed wrong, Ceres replied. No one argued. Cross remained silent near the edge of the room, studying the enemy formations. Then he asked one question. Where are their supply ships? Several officers looked confused. What? The logistics fleet. There isn't one. Cross nodded slowly. I was afraid of that. Ceres turned toward him. You recognize their strategy. I recognize their confidence. The room fell silent again. Cross pointed toward the holographic projection. No supply vessels. No repair ships. No fuel carriers. What does that mean? It means they don't expect this war to last long. The realization spread across the room like ice. They weren't preparing for a campaign. They were preparing for an execution. A communications officer suddenly called out. Incoming transmission. The hologram shifted, revealing a towering armored figure seated upon a black throne. Its face resembled polished stone, scarred by countless battles. Its yellow eyes burned with absolute certainty. I am High Warlord Verok. His voice shook the chamber. You stand before the restored Karak's dominion. We offer a single mercy. Surrender. Those who submit will serve. Those who resist will cease to exist. The transmission ended. No threats. No negotiation. Just certainty. One young coalition captain whispered. They intend to enslave us all. Cross quietly corrected him. No. The captain looked over. They intend to erase you. Before anyone could ask what he meant, another officer rushed into the room carrying a secured data tablet. Admiral, we've accessed restricted human military archives. Ceres looked surprised. How? The human government just removed the highest classification. She looked toward Cross. You authorized this? He nodded. They are going to need context. The officer activated the files. Ancient battlefield recordings filled the room. Burning cities. Orbiting fleets. Worlds consumed by fire. None of the footage showed coalition enemies. The insignias belonged to humanity itself. A historian gasped. These are human wars. Another file opened. Global conflict statistics. Casualties, hundreds of millions. Then another. Planetary civil wars. Intercontinental campaigns. Orbital bombardments. The list seemed endless. An elderly alien scholar stared in disbelief. Your species fought each other. For centuries, Cross answered quietly. The scholar shook his head. Why? Cross gave a sad smile. Because we hadn't learned how expensive hatred really was. Another archive appeared. The title froze everyone in place. The Unification War. Confirmed military fatalities. 4,812. A younger officer frowned. That's your number. Cross nodded. My final campaign. Rackard, the same Vex officer who had joked at the reception, stared at him with wide eyes. You weren't exaggerating. No. But how are you even alive? Cross looked at the old battlefield footage. Luck. Nobody believed him. The tactical display suddenly flashed again. Enemy fleet accelerating. They'll reach firing range in 23 minutes. Panic spread through the command staff. The coalition had never fought an enemy this large. Several officers began discussing evacuation routes. Others proposed surrender. Raka slammed his fist onto the command table. We cannot win. No, Cross agreed. Everyone turned toward him. We can't. Hope disappeared from several faces. Then Cross continued. But I've seen worse odds. Admiral Sarah stepped closer. You have a plan? He remained silent for a moment. Finally, he answered. I know how the Karaks think. That sentence stopped every conversation. Sarah narrowed her eyes. How? Cross looked directly at the approaching enemy fleet. Because humanity has fought them before. The room went completely still. Someone laughed nervously. That's impossible. The records say the Karaks vanished 400 years ago. Cross met their stunned expressions. They didn't vanish. We defeated them. Every officer stared at him in disbelief. Humanity had never reported such a war. No historical record mentioned first contact before joining the coalition. Sarah spoke carefully. If that's true, why did Earth keep it secret? Cross's expression darkened. Because victory came at a price. Before anyone could ask another question, every display in the command center flashed crimson. A new hyperspace rapture had opened. It wasn't one fleet. It was another. Then another. Wave after wave of Karaks warships poured into the system until the stars themselves disappeared behind black metal. The invasion force had doubled. And this time, they had come for the species that had once defeated them. The ghost of the first war. No one spoke. The command center remained frozen as thousands of additional Karaks warships emerged from hyperspace. The tactical display, once crowded with red markers, became a solid crimson wall stretching across the star system. A sensor officer finally broke the silence. Revised estimate, 7,000 warships. Another report arrived almost immediately. They are deploying planetary assault carriers. A third officer added in a trembling voice. And super heavy siege platforms. Admiral Saras looked toward Ethan Cross. You fought them before. It wasn't a question anymore. Cross nodded once. Yes. Then tell us everything. For several seconds, he simply stared at the holographic fleet. His reflection shimmered in the projection, an aging soldier surrounded by ghosts no one else could see. Finally, he began. It happened 136 years ago. We hadn't discovered faster than light travel. We hadn't met another intelligent species. We believed we were alone. The room listened in complete silence. Then one night, Cross continued, our deep space observatories detected objects entering our solar system. At first, our scientists thought they were asteroids. They weren't. Images appeared on the main display as humanity's newly declassified archives synchronized with the collision systems. Ancient footage showed enormous black ships descending toward Earth. Cities beneath them looked tiny. Powerless. A young coalition officer whispered. They invaded your homeworld. Cross nodded. They demanded our surrender. What did humanity do? Asked Raka quietly. Cross gave him a tired look. We argued. Several officers blinked. You argued. For 6 days. Even in the middle of a crisis, a few confused expressions appeared. Our governments couldn't agree on whether the transmission was real. Someone muttered. That sounds remarkably inefficient. It was. Cross almost smiled. Then the Karoks destroyed one of our orbital stations. The smile vanished. And humanity stopped arguing. The next images were difficult to watch. Factories operating day and night. Civilian ships transformed into warships. Entire cities converted into military production centers. Children planting crops while adults built weapons. Every nation. Every language. Every culture. Working toward a single purpose. Survival. A coalition historian stared in amazement. Your entire species united. Not immediately. Cross looked away. But eventually we realized something. What? The Karoks didn't care where our borders were. Silence filled the room. So we stopped caring too. The hologram shifted again. Massive battles erupted across the solar system. Primitive human vessels, crude compared to modern coalition technology, threw themselves against superior Karoks fleets. Again. 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 They lost thousands of ships. Millions of lives. Yet every defeat was followed by another fleet. Then another. Then another. A Vex officer frowned. They kept attacking even when they couldn't win? Cross answered without hesitation. They attacked because they couldn't afford not to. The casualty numbers climbed higher with every battle. 10 million. 30 million. 70 million. 100 million. Gasps echoed through the command center. The coalition had never witnessed casualties on that scale. To them, war was limited. Controlled. Humanity's war had been absolute. They nearly exterminated us, Cross said quietly. But every city they destroyed built our resolve. Every world they burned made us more dangerous. Raka crossed his arms. And your kill count? Cross closed his eyes for a moment. I commanded the 18th Orbital Assault Division. The last offensive. Historical footage appeared. Hundreds of human ships charging directly into the heart of the Karoks command fleet. Explosions illuminated the darkness like newborn stars. The mission had one objective. Destroy the flagship. No matter the cost. The recording became unstable. Explosions. Emergency alarms. Hull breaches. Hand-to-hand fighting inside alien corridors. Then, a young Ethan Cross appeared on the screen, wearing scorched combat armor, leading a handful of exhausted soldiers through smoke-filled passageways. The footage ended abruptly. A final report replaced it. Mission success. Human survival probability F4%. Enemy Supreme Command eliminated. Cross looked away before anyone could study the report further. I was one of 14 who came back. Nobody knew what to say. Admiral Seras finally understood. Your kill count wasn't something you celebrated. No. It was something you survived. Cross nodded. I remember everyone. The room remained silent. The arrogant jokes from earlier now felt shameful. Raka stepped forward. I owe you an apology. Cross shook his head. No. You owe your people the determination to survive. Suddenly, every alarm on the station activated simultaneously. Not one. All of them. The tactical display zoomed toward the center of the enemy formation. A colossal vessel was emerging. It dwarfed every battleship around it. Nearly the size of a small moon. Its black armor shimmered with ancient energy fields. The bridge fell silent. One frightened technician whispered. What is that? Cross's face lost what little color remained. I know that ship. Sarah turned sharply. You've seen it before? Yes. His voice was barely audible. I destroyed it. The room erupted with confused voices. Destroyed. But it's here. How? Cross stared at the impossible image. Only one explanation existed. One he had prayed was impossible. The Karoks didn't rebuild their flagship. He swallowed hard. They recovered it. A transmission request appeared on every screen. The sender identified itself with a single name. High Warlord Varrock. The image resolved. The stone-faced warlord leaned forward on his throne. Then he smiled. Not at Admiral Ceres. Not at the coalition. At Ethan Cross. I remember you, a human. Every officer looked toward Cross. Varrock continued. You are the last survivor of the battle that shamed my empire. His smile widened. This time, I have come to finish what we started. The transmission ended. For the first time since the invasion began, Ethan Cross looked genuinely afraid. Because the Karaks hadn't crossed the stars seeking conquest alone. They had crossed them for revenge. The weight of one soldier. For several heartbeats after the transmission ended, no one in the command center moved. Every eye was fixed on Commander Ethan Cross. Not because he was human. Because the enemy had crossed hundreds of light years for him. Admiral Ceres broke the silence. All this. She glanced at the tactical display where nearly 8,000 Karoks warships surrounded the system. This fleet came because of one man. Cross slowly shook his head. No. They came because of what one man represents. The room remained silent. They don't fear me, he continued. They fear the memory of losing. Fleet intelligence hurried to analyze the newly unlocked human archives. More classified files streamed across the displays, battle reports, intercepted enemy communications, and psychological assessments of the Karaks after the First War. One document caught everyone's attention. Karok's strategic doctrine. Primary principle, victory is eternal. Secondary principle, defeat must never be remembered. A coalition historian frowned. What does that mean? Cross answered immediately. In Karak's culture, defeat is considered a disease. Several officers exchanged puzzled looks. A disease. They erase every record of every loss. They rewrite history. They execute commanders who fail. They destroy evidence until only victory remains. He looked toward Varrock's retreating flagship on the display. But they couldn't erase Earth. The room slowly understood. Humanity had become the one scar the Karak's empire could never hide. An operations officer interrupted. Enemy assault formations are moving. They'll enter weapons range in 12 minutes. Another display flashed. Our combined fleet numbers just under 900 combat ships. The comparison was almost laughable. 900. Against nearly 8,000. No tactical simulation predicted survival. One admiral from another coalition member world finally voiced what many were thinking. We should surrender. No one answered. He continued. If they only want Commander Cross, I'll go. The voice surprised everyone. Cross had spoken. Every head turned toward him. If my surrender prevents billions of deaths, I'm willing. Admiral Ceres slammed both hands onto the command table. Absolutely not. It isn't your decision. It became my decision when humanity joined this alliance. Cross met her gaze. I've sacrificed before. And how many people died because you had to carry that burden alone? Ceres replied. The question hit harder than any accusation. Cross had no answer. Raka stepped forward. I've spent my entire career believing strength meant winning every battle. He looked directly at Cross. I was wrong. Cross frowned. What do you mean? I mocked your kill count. Raka lowered his head. But now I understand. He looked around the command center. You weren't counting victories. You were counting the price. One by one, other officers stepped forward. A pilot. A captain. An engineer. Then dozens more. Finally, the command chamber was filled with soldiers standing behind the human commander. Ceres smiled faintly. You're no longer fighting alone. For the first time in many years, Ethan Cross felt something unfamiliar. Not confidence. Not certainty. Hope. The tactical display suddenly changed. The Karak's fleet split into 3 enormous attack formations. Cross studied their movements for only a few seconds before speaking. They are making a mistake. An officer blinked. Mistake. They are overconfiding to our last war. He pointed toward the enemy center. They expect humanity to attack their flagship again. They've reinforced it. So, asked Ceres. So they've weakened their flanks. The room fell quiet. Cross began issuing orders. Move our fastest cruisers to sectors 7 and 9. Hide the carriers behind the moon. Keep every electronic signature silent until my signal. One admiral looked horrified. That's insane. It leaves the center exposed. Cross nodded. Exactly. The officer frowned. You want them to think we are desperate. I want them to think I'm predictable. Ceres smiled. And then? Cross's eyes hardened. We remind them why they lost the first time. Minutes later, the coalition fleet drifted silently through the darkness. No broadcasts. No active targeting. Only the quiet hum of reactors waiting for the inevitable. Across the void, a high warlord Varrock watched from the bridge of his colossal flagship. A subordinate approached. The human fleet is holding position. Varrock smiled. He remembers. He knows he cannot win. Another officer asked. Shall we begin orbital bombardment? No. Varrock stood. I waited 136 years. I will look into his eyes before he dies. He ordered the fleet forward. Thousands of warships accelerated. The stars disappeared behind walls of black armor. Back aboard the coalition flagship, the countdown reached its final seconds. Weapons officers reported target locks. Shield generators roared to maximum power. Every soldier knew the first volley could decide the fate of entire civilizations. Cross stood calmly at the center of the bridge. He wasn't looking at the enemy fleet. He was looking at a small photograph tucked inside his uniform. It showed 14 exhausted soldiers standing together beneath a ruined Earth flag. Only one of them was still alive. He gently returned the photograph to his pocket. Then he opened a fleet-wide communication channel. Every coalition pilot, every marine, every engineer, every frightened recruit heard his voice. When I was young, I believed courage meant not being afraid. I was wrong. Courage is being terrified and choosing to stand anyway. He looked toward the impossible armada filling the stars. They outnumber us. They outgun us. They believe history belongs to them. A faint smile crossed his face. So let's remind them. History has a habit of surprising those who think they've already won. He lowered his hand toward the command console. All fleets, execute Ghost Protocol. Across the darkness, hundreds of coalition ships suddenly vanished from every Karak sensor. Verok's confident smile disappeared. What did the human just do? Before anyone aboard the Karak's flagship could answer, dozens of impossible sensor contacts appeared behind their fleet. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The battle had begun, and nothing was unfolding the way the Karaks had planned. The answer they never expected. High Warlord Verok stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Moments earlier, the coalition fleet had appeared hopelessly outnumbered. Now, thousands of new contacts surrounded the Karaks armada from every direction. His bridge officers erupted into confusion. Impossible. Our sensors are detecting additional fleets. They're emerging behind us. Verok slammed a massive fist onto his command console. No civilization can build reinforcements this quickly. A sensor technician recalibrated the scanners. Then his voice became uncertain. They are not reinforcements. What? They are decoys. Ghost Protocol. It was one of the last strategies humanity had developed during the First War. Cross had known the Karaks trusted overwhelming force and flawless sensor networks. They expected enemies to respond logically. So humanity had learned to fight illogically. Hundreds of unmanned drones, each projecting the energy signature of a capital ship, spread through the battlefield like a swarm of phantoms. At the same time, coalition cruisers released clouds of reflective particles that scattered targeting beams and distorted long-range scans. To the Karaks' computers, the battlefield had become chaos. Friend and foe blended together. Targets multiplied faster than they could be verified. For the first time in more than a century, the Karaks lost their greatest advantage. Certainty. Fire. Verok roared. Thousands of Karaks' weapons discharged at once. Brilliant lances of crimson energy crossed the darkness. But many struck empty space. Others hit their own decoy readings. Several Karaks' ships even collided while attempting emergency maneuvers. Across the coalition fleet, the cheers erupted. It's working. They can't track us. Commander Cross remained calm. This is only the opening. He knew confusion never lasted forever. The Karaks would adapt. They always did. Phase 2, Cross ordered. Hidden behind the system's largest moon, the coalition carriers launched every fighter they possessed. Instead of charging directly at the enemy, the fighters split into dozens of independent groups, striking communication relays, sensor arrays, and shield emitters before disappearing again into the confusion. The attacks caused little physical damage. But psychologically, they were devastating. Every explosion forced the Karaks to question their own tactical picture. Every destroyed relay delayed new orders. Every second mattered. Admiral Seras watched the battle unfold with amazement. We are not trying to overpower them. Cross nodded. We are making them doubt themselves. Aboard the flagship, Verok's confidence began to crack. Where is the human? No answer came. His officers couldn't isolate Cross's command ship. The Ghost Protocol hid every identifying signal. The human commander could be anywhere. Or nowhere. Verok growled. He hides behind illusions. Cross's voice suddenly echoed across every Karak's communication channel. No. I hide behind people willing to protect each other. The transmission carried no traceable source. It came from everywhere at once. Verok realized the terrible truth. He wasn't fighting one commander. He was fighting an alliance that had learned humanity's greatest lesson. Unity. Cross looked around the coalition bridge. Hours earlier, these officers had barely trusted one another. Now Vex warriors defended engineers from distant worlds. Pilots volunteered for impossible rescue missions. Medical ships ignored species and flags alike. No one asked who belonged where. They simply helped whoever needed them. Cross smiled. This is how we won before. Verok made one final gamble. All ships. Ignore the fleet. Destroy the station. If the coalition command center fell, confusion would spread. The surviving worlds would surrender. Thousands of Karak's vessels turned toward coalition station Asterion. Alarms screamed across every console. An operations officer shouted. They'll reach firing range in less than 2 minutes. Ceres looked toward Cross. We can't stop them all. Cross nodded slowly. No. He opened one final encrypted channel. The message was only 3 words. Hammerfall. Authorization green. Nothing happened. Then, deep within the asteroid belt surrounding the system, ancient signals awakened. Massive objects that had drifted silently for decades began to move. The coalition stared in confusion. One officer whispered. What are those? Cross answered quietly. Insurance. Gigantic automated defense platforms, constructed in secret by humanity after joining the coalition, rose from the asteroids. They had never been activated before. Their purpose had always been the same. If the Karaks ever returned, Earth would be ready. Thousands of concealed rail cannons fired simultaneously. The darkness exploded with streaks of white light. The first Karak's battle line vanished. Then the second. Then the third. The invasion formation shattered. Silence followed. Not because the battle was over. Because the Karaks had finally realized they had lost. Again. Verok stood motionless on his bridge. His fleet, the pride of a restored empire, was breaking apart. Retreat signals spread from ship to ship. For the first time in centuries, the Karak's vessels turned away from battle. They fled. Hours later, rescue ships drifted among the wreckage, saving survivors from every species, including wounded Karaks. Raka watched human medics carry an injured enemy soldier onto a hospital shuttle. You would save them. Cross looked toward the stars. If we stop seeing people after the fighting ends, then the war wins. Raka lowered his head in respect. That evening, the officers gathered once more in the Hall of Banners. The room was quieter than before. No boasting. No jokes. Only gratitude. Raka approached Cross, carrying 2 glasses of blue nectar. This time, he said with a smile, I'd like to ask a different question. Cross accepted the drink. What question? Raka looked around at the soldiers of dozens of worlds standing together. How many lives have you saved? Cross thought for a long moment. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, perhaps the first in many years. I stopped counting. The hall remained silent. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because they finally understood the answer that mattered. The human skill count had never been a trophy. It had been a burden. And the reason humanity became legendary among the stars was not because its soldiers knew how to wage war. But because, after surviving the worst wars imaginable, they chose to build a future where no one else would have to.